Hi, everybody. Welcome to Amigos and welcome back to the Amigos Summer of Arcade. This week, Aaron, we're taking a look at Galaxian.
Oh man.
Yeah. Now, Aaron, you are you like a good shoot 'em up, right?
Yeah, I mean, I try to like them. I'm not that great at a lot of them, but I
Yeah,
try.
but if you were going to list some of your favorite games of all time, you more than one shoot 'em up would be on that list, wouldn't you say?
That's true. That's absolutely true. Especially some of the older stuff, but there's some newer stuff that I kind of like too.
Now, the eternal question is, are you more of a vert or more of a horizontal guy, and why?
Well, I would say, if I look at the games that I hold dear, the most of them are verts. I have to say. Now it's funny because horizontal shooters were I mean, let's take Space Invaders out of the picture for a minute, which was the King Dog. If you think about stuff like Scramble, or Super Cobra, those games were horizontal shooters, and I mean that. By that I mean you travel from left to right, not necessarily the screen orientation, because they were vertical screens, but traveling from left to right. There aren't as many good shooters, in my opinion, as there are going like up the screen, up and down. Does that make any sense? Because if I sit down and think of my favorite shooters or shmups, you've got Phoenix, you got Galaga, you got Alcon, you got Warblade, you got Deluxe Galaga, like Raiden. I mean, there's a ton of them that I like, and the majority of them are you shooting upwards. What about you?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think that the vertical shooter is the better way to go. And I'll tell you why. There's two reasons. One, a vertical shooter very rarely, although there are exceptions like Xenon, very rarely puts you in a cave or a catacomb where running into the edges destroys you. I hate
Yeah,
that in games, and
it is unusual.
you get that all the time in horizontal shooters.
Yeah. Well,
Number
it's some of
two,
them. Yeah.
yeah, in some of them, but I think it's more common. Um, Number two, I like the idea of flying over an expanse. When you're playing a vertical shooter, a lot of times, like when you're playing Twin B or when you're playing Alcon or something, you're seeing stuff going on the surface of the planet as you're
Yeah.
flying over. Gives you stuff to look at. When you're playing a horizontal shooter, you either get space or you get clouds. That's it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for example, that you can do things moving from left to right that you can't do and you mentioned sort of, but like if you think about a game like Super Cobra where they've got the caverns in it you have to navigate through, that kind of thing. It's different. You don't see that often on a up and down shooter. You see that more on games like that. Now you got your weirdo ones like something like Zaxxon or Point of View where you or Viewpoint where you have that sort of isometric angle, and you see that in those as well. But normally on a shooter that's just up and down, you don't see that much stuff where you could get trapped in there.
Yeah,
I'm
and
sure
I
someone
think
could
that
think of something I can't think of off the top of my head, but I can't think of any right now.
yeah, and I mean I hate that. That's what my whole point is. I don't like getting trapped. I don't like having to choose left or right and then having to back out of it and then go the other way. So I mean, if you're down with that, like Super Cobra is great, but I don't like that. I like when I'm playing a space game, I only want to focus on killing stuff.
Yeah.
I want to be a shooting machine and just kind of destroy the things that are on the screen. And then every once in a while, look at the cool stuff that's going. Like I love an Alcon, how there's like tanks that are rolling across stuff
Yeah.
like that. I love all that junk.
Well, I mean, it's funny. I was sitting there thinking of games that go to left or right now. I mean, I like both really, but I mean, my favorites are the straight up and down verge. Stuff in the tradition of Space Invaders and Gorp and stuff like that. Maybe I don't know why. Maybe it's just the way they was the first ones I played. That's where I got Galaxian's one that I played back in the day when it came out, and it was so maybe that's just the way it was embedded in my head. And so, but I mean, again, Super Cobra and Scramble were pretty early, so I don't know, but they seem to be the more popular of the two, I would say.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I to me, whenever I think shooter, I always just think Galaga. That's like that's what pops into my head. Is there a game that you immediately think of when when somebody says the word shoot 'em up for you?
Well, that one is probably the one, and it's funny how I mean, of course, if we're gonna talk about Galaxian, of course, Galaga is sort of like next in the series. It's funny how different it feels and plays, but
Yeah.
the differences are sort of minimal in a lot of ways. It's a strange thing, but I mean, if you think about the all-time most popular games, Galaga's on that list. I mean,
Oh yeah.
it's probably the top 10 at the least. In
100%.
America, it's probably the top 5. I mean,
It's one
it
of the
was a
few
huge
games that
one.
it's one of the few games you still see around at places like pizza parlors.
Yep, you're right, man. I
Mhm.
got one out there, so I should know.
Yeah. All right, Aaron. Well, let's talk about Galaxian.
Yes, sir. All right,
All right.
Galaxian.
That's right, Galaxian. So this thing was released way back in 1979. This is, Aaron, the first
Crazy.
RGB color arcade game. Is that
It,
true? Did I just make that up?
no,
I think
well,
it's
I mean,
true.
here's the
This is
thing. I always heard that, uh, and I don't. No one's ever told me otherwise,
Here's the
and I
thing.
can't think of one.
Whenever you're doing research about arcade machines
Yeah.
online, what you're doing is you're taking opinions that people have and you're stacking them up against what other people wrote. So everything that I'm going to say here is because I read it on like 3 or 4 different websites, and so I'm assuming it's true. There is so little actual factual documentation on a lot of these early days in the arcades that if there was a color video game, like RGB color video game before it, let us know in the comments. I would be happy to recant that.
Well, I mean,
But
something else too to think about is like think about all the weird stuff that we just found. Like game. Remember that I told you about that game? Remember that game we played on ARG that they found
yeah,
one
the
copy at a
universal
bar
game,
or something like
right?
that? It's like so you. It is when you say this is the first this or this is the first that. I mean, you could say it. I've always heard that. Just like I always heard Gyrus was the first game with stereo. Okay, is that we don't know for sure. There's so many games, so many people made them, but we can go with that and leave it there.
Yeah, yeah. So, anyway, if that was the only claim to fame this game had, then it would be something. It would be something big. I mean, you were sort of too young, right, really be around for a lot of black and white games in the arcades.
Oh no,
By the
I saw
time that
tons.
you saw tons, okay.
Yeah.
Well, tell me about what it was like when you were used to seeing black and white games, and then all of a sudden you saw a color game popped up.
Well, it's funny because a lot of the black and white games we saw we thought were in color. So, for example, and you know this, Bo, probably some of the listeners do too. There was a gimmick back in the old days, and this is predates video games, where people would put like they would watch baseball games and they would put a thing on their TV that would just stick to it, and like the it would be green at the bottom and blue at the top, and so you could
Hmm.
sort of watch your game, and in your mind you could be like, oh wow, look at that, I mean, this was a real thing in
Yeah,
like the
yeah,
50s, and
absolutely.
so video games adapted that sort of technology and this with these films that they would put on the screen. And so a lot of games that were in black and white, they would put these filters on these overlaid filters on top of them. They were usually thin, plastic, and they would put them over the screen, and so you would get the illusion that you were playing a color game, like
Yeah, and
Space
a lot of
Invaders
them were
had it.
really well done. I mean, they would use mirrors to reflect the screen back up on the overlay, and it would really be a convincing effect, especially
Yeah,
once you got, towards the mid 70s. But there were also just straight up black and white arcade machines that existed for a
sure.
long time.
Yeah.
The most famous being like the X's and O's football, but there was a basketball black and white game. I think the Fire Engine game, wasn't that a black and white game?
Oh yeah, that there were versions of that of like shootout, under various names where you duel on either side of the screen, and there was a rock or a stagecoach in the middle. That I would see those things in color and black and white. It depends on, and clones, Pong clones and stuff. There were plenty of games that were in black and white, but they found out pretty early on that they could use the overlay, and the overlay gimmick wasn't just used for arcade machines. I mean, they used that stuff in like mechanical games stuff. It was pretty common knowledge. So seeing something in some sort of color wasn't unusual. What was unusual, what got my attention as a kid, this is gonna sound stupid, was the star field. Like the moving star field with the stars and they twinkle and stuff. I remember thinking to myself, man, look at that. And then the spaceship sort of looked like the USS Enterprise, which I also thought was cool. I mean, you got to think this came out. I was what did you say? This came out 79. I was 8.
79.
I do remember this game. I do remember playing the game, but those are the things I remember. Not so much the color, but of course I was probably too stupid to realize that. Hey, look at that! The blue ships stay blue all the way down the screen, as opposed to turning yellow and then red like they would if there was a film over it.
Right, right. And so this was released by Namco. This was a pretty early release. Namco been in business since the mid 50s. They started out as a children's ride manufacturer. And you know, as the electronics moved on, they sort of shifted gears into that. They had an EM game that I would love to try. In 1970, they came out with this game called Racer, which is described on Moby as a coin-operated mechanical driving simulator. So I don't know if it's like a huge version of one of those steering games where you've got the paper that just loops over and over again. I want to know more about Racer by Namco. What do you think about that, Aaron? Have you heard anything about Racer before?
You know, I mean, admittedly, a lot of this stuff I saw when I was very young. So,
Mhm.
and you'd go to an arcade, and as a little kid, I mean, it's just sort of like, I guess now too, if you're a little kid, you're overwhelmed. You're like, holy smokes! So I don't remember that off the top of my head, but maybe if I saw it, I might. But I don't remember seeing it. I wish I had. Now that you mentioned it, it sounds great.
Yeah, yeah. Their first electronic arcade game. Both of us had a chance to play when we were in Chicago a couple years ago at the Galloping Ghost. GB. GB is like a cross between a breakout clone and pinball. And so they brought that out in 78. There was a sequel to GB that came out in 79, but they really hit their stride with Galaxian. Galaxian, you know, of course, being the first color machine that came out. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. This game, all these guys were uncredited, as everybody was in Japan back in the day. And also a lot of times in the US, the programmers and people weren't credited. But hardware was Shigechi Ishimura. He worked on Miss Pac-Man. He worked on a bunch of games that we enjoy, like King and Balloon, Dig Dug. But he was active as recently as 2009 when he was one of the executive producers for the Soul Calibur game for the PSP. So it's a big career. You got
It's a good game too.
he also did the sound for the game, and programming was Koichi Teshiro, and he did all of the heavy hitters: Galaxian, Rally X, Pole Position, and then he was involved in a game called Steel Gunner, which was an arcade game that I'm not familiar with from 1990. There's a lot of those late 80s, early 90s pre Street Fighter 2 arcade games that I just never have played because they were never around. This was during the era when arcades were just sort of dying off. So,
Yeah, yeah.
lots of stuff to uncover there. Again, this game released in 1979. Um, I can't even imagine, you know, the look on people's faces because obviously space shooters were huge. You had Space Invaders that was, you know, up until this point probably the most financially successful arcade game. And then Galaxian comes around, and what does it bring to the table? Well, first of all, it brings you color graphics, real color graphics. Second of all, it brings you better sort of enemy, quote unquote, AI. And then in Space Invaders, your invaders are moving across the screen in flanks, slowly descending upon you while firing missiles at you. But you don't have to worry about them getting all up in your face. Not the case with Galaxian. In Galaxian, you've got these ships, they peel off from formation and they dive bomb right towards you. Not only that, you've got different colored bad guys act different ways. The aliens are classified as drones, which are the blue guys at the top, emissaries, which are the purple guys. The Hornets are the red guys, and then the commanders are the 2 yellow ships at the top of the screen that are in charge of the show. And each one of those is worth a different amount of points. The higher they are to the top, the more points they're worth. So you had this entirely new kind of enemy mechanic that you had to deal with. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about that Galaxian really brought to the table was the idea of having your score up at the top left of the screen, then your high score in the middle. I mean, this is something that we take advantage of, or we take for granted. We assume that video games since the beginning of time have had your score in the upper left and then the high score in the middle. Well, Galaxian was the very first game to do that. I mean, it's pretty incredible. It's a lot of firsts, wouldn't you say, Aaron?
Oh yeah, I mean, what do you think had more effect on how many times this was played, the color graphics or the high score? Because
Both.
I mean, I could say, I mean, it would be, I would wonder, because that was a huge deal, and if, I mean, this predates the initials for the most part, but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
still, I mean, it was a big deal to have that score. And so, yeah, that was I think that was very, very wise a move by them. Very clever. They were forward thinking over there because you're breaking out of the pack for sure on this. And plus, you know, people had Space Invaders and all of its clones and ripoffs have been around for a few years by the time this came out. And so you were right. Space Invaders just they sort of mope around. They don't come down like Space Invaders. I mean, listen, I'm not going to badmouth. It was a big game, but I mean, by today's standards, even by when this was released, it's not that big a deal. This game was more exciting. There was more happening. It was a more difficult game, and it could easily walk out of the shadow of Space Invaders and be its own thing. And then they had the color, the high score; those were just icing on the cake. But the gameplay was far more interesting than the gameplay in Space Invaders.
Yeah. This was a wildly successful arcade machine. It looks like by 1982, it had sold approximately 50,000 units in the United States. I mean, it's always mind-boggling to me to think about how many arcade games are out there, especially when you compare them to the numbers for pinball machines. I mean, there's pinball machines that had runs of like 3,000 games and that was it. These things
or
were
less.
cranked out like at a scale that pinball manufacturers could never dream of.
Yeah, it's funny. I always wonder how how games before Pong and Space Invaders, how many were made. You know,
Mhm.
you know, the old West shooters, the things where you mechanically move a car on something or a helicopter around a area. I bet they would knock out maybe a couple hundred of these. You know, I always wonder. And then you're talking about something like this. I mean, if you think about an arcade owner, or for Namco, for example, as well, the amount of lucrative money you're getting out of these things, 50K, and these things have the ability to be wheeled into an arcade, stuck in the corner, turned on, and just watch the money come in. There's
Right.
not that much maintenance. There's not, I mean, think about the maintenance on some of those old games, the light gun games, the scrolling games that were all mechanical. It'd be way, way more difficult to repair. I mean, this is a board swap or a monitor swap, and you're back in business. So, 50,000, and the cabinet for this is pretty attractive. It's colorful. The marquee's very colorful. It's sort of iconic in a way.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, I think Namco did a great job, total package on this.
Yeah, and this was also one of the games that was released by Coleco in the mini arcade format, so you could
Yeah.
take this home with you. And in recent years, this thing is available in any number of pocket arcade size things. Usually, they bundle it with Galaxian and Galaga together, and so you can play this any number of ways. In a smaller version now. In a lot of ways, Aaron, this game is overshadowed by its sequel, Galaga. We would be remiss if we didn't spend at least a little bit of time talking about the difference between Galaga and Galaxian. Aaron, you are much more skilled in the ways of both of these games than I am. So before we move on to the Amiga version, you want to just talk a little bit about the differences between the two games and what makes Galaxian unique?
Oh, sure, sure. I mean, there are a lot of similarities. The multicolored aliens and the starred background, even the cabinets are similar. What makes them different is the speed that they play, and really, I think the big difference is how you fire. One, and we'll get into this more further in, but in Galaxian, you can't shoot until your shots hit something or left the screen. You get one go at it. Where in Galaga, you could rapid fire. Plus, you could have multiple ships connected to you, two ships that are both rapid firing. So the amount of firepower you can unleash on the bad guy is it's so much different. And it's I'll get into this a little bit more, but that's a huge difference. The other major difference, of course, the sound's better. There's a bonus stage, but
High score screen on Galaga.
Sure, yeah, and then you've also got the way the aliens operate. They're sort of bug or scorpion like, the aliens, and they whip into formation. They fly into formation, and then when they come down at you, they're far more agile fighters. They will, in fact, they can even come down under you and come back up from the bottom of the screen or come off the screen. The aliens in Galaxian, they sort of meander down. Every once in a blue moon, one of them will do a little curly Q, but for the most part, they come down in pretty slow, and they also only come down in packs of like one. I mean, they'll individually or the three. The ships that come down with that main command ship, you get a little squadron. There's a lot more of that squadron action going on in Galaga. So I would say those are the major differences. Galaga is the natural update to Galaxian. Like, if you looked at Galaxian and thought to yourself, what would make this more fun? They did that, and that's why Galaga is so popular. They looked at what they could do better, and they did it.
Yeah. So with that, Aaron, let's talk about the Amiga version of Galaxian.
Sure. So, we've covered a few of the transcodes or the games that have been ported over the Amiga from JOTD, and this is another one. This one came out a couple years ago, 2023. It's funny, something I found out about this boat. I don't know. I'm sure this is documented somewhere, but I didn't see it. Since this is called a Galaxian500, I played this on 500. Fired it up. And I noticed that on the 500, the star field doesn't move in the background. It's static. Right. I don't know if you noticed that. I didn't know it.
I noticed it right away.
Yeah. Oh, so you tried this on 500 as well then?
No. I mean, I'm sorry. I take it back. I thought you mean that the stars don't blink in and out.
No, these don't. I mean,
because that's the difference between the arcade. Yeah, I was going to say that's the difference between the arcade version and the Amiga version. But I didn't try this on a normal 500.
Yeah, I tried it on both, and so they don't. It's kind of weird that don't move. This does run on pretty much any Amiga, OCS, ECS. Of course, you could download this for free. And this again from JOTD. JOTD's real name, Jean-Francois Fabre, was the coder on this. The graphics, audio, and miscellaneous items were done by Mark McDougall. And just to get into, because I want to give JOTD his due, and I've played. If you go back to a stream I did last year, I played almost every game he ever made up to that point. If you want to see him, including Burger Time, Pooh Yan, Elevator Action, Galaga, which we just talked about, Phoenix, Moon Patrol, Donkey Kong, Tetris, Super Bagman and Bagman, Karate Champ, Pingo, Xevious. He did a sort of a upgrade of Supercars 2 to AGA, Scramble, Amador, Miss Pac-Man, and Pac-Man. So he's done a lot of these. This is just one of a many. Now, this is still considered beta on the Amiga. This is just as his words. He says this is a transcode from the original arcade game Z80 to the 68K assembly. He has pretty much given this. This hasn't been updated for since November, and I don't think we're going to see another upgrade. If there is, I'd be surprised. The last time he did an update was November 1st, 2023. You can play this with the keyboard or joysticks, and you could play. He's got it set up to where you can do one or two players with the joystick, so he's got it set up quite nicely. And of course, when you play a game that comes from the arcade that's transcoded, you should expect pretty accurate behavior. Um, am I the King Dong of Galaxian? No, but I have played a lot of it over the years, and so I think I've got a pretty good feel for it, even if I'm not the best player at it. And I played this week and the arcade. Did you get the arcade game in this week?
Yeah, I played both.
Yeah. So because we're going to talk about that, but I will say it's a pretty accurate version. The aliens behave for the most part like I think they're supposed to. I think the speed of the game is pretty close to what you would expect. Bo mentioned this early, but one of the most obvious things is that the blinking stars aren't there. The star, which if you'll recall, I believe he had the same problem in Phoenix. I believe there was some stuff that went on the background that wasn't in Phoenix. So I guess there's something there in that scroll that must be difficult. Me and Bo, not programmers. I know it's, believe it or not.
Trust me, if it was easy, it would be in there, I'm sure. If it was easy for him to make those stars blink, he would have done it.
I was watching the chat for this, and I noticed that various people had found various problems. And I think that he updated these and fixed it, but I don't know for sure. One of them was that the game really doesn't get any harder after I think it was like level 4. I believe that was fixed, but I don't know because I don't have a list of the updates he did. I do know that one of the places you're going to find, you're going to be pretty easy to find the differences is the audio.
Yeah.
The audio in the arcade, I mean, they're close. He gets it closely right. But it doesn't, as you proceed to the level, the audio doesn't act the same way, does it, Bo?
No.
In fact, you remember in Space Invaders, you got that dun 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 dun. Eventually, dun 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 dun. You know, it's sped up. This is a lot like that.
Yes.
I mean, in fact, by the time you get near the end of the level, it's like you're gonna have a panic attack because the music's going bonkers, or if you call that music.
Well,
what did you think about?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is very, very similar to. I was struck by the similarities with this and a lot of the old Gottlieb early solid state pinball machines. The sound design in Galaxian is very similar to something like Black Hole or Haunted House.
That's a good eye, Bo.
Yeah, and so you've got this this drone and this thump. That's what it is. It's a drone and a thump. And when you're playing the arcade game, it's all encompassing. I mean, it's a powerful sound.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that the Paula has whatever it takes to generate that sort of frequency. I think it's more of a frequency issue, but then it's also, like you said, like, I don't understand what's going on under the hood in terms of a transcode, because I think that the sound was on a completely different chip. You know, it was like a dedicated sound chip. And so I'm sure he's trying to shoehorn that into the code in some way. And I can understand how it's not a top priority for sure, and why it's not exactly the same. But it's you don't realize what a big part of the game it is until you go back and you play the arcade original and you literally feel that vibration.
Well, aside from that, it's just that the sound isn't right. It doesn't act right at the end when you get as the game goes on. It just doesn't say there's something going on with the sound that's inaccurate. And I bet you're. Listen, that's a pretty astute observation for someone who's not a programmer, because I think you probably are right. And maybe there was some, we're talking about who knows what kind of crazy analog, whatever they got going on. Who knows?
I mean, this is the 70s. You still had stuff like that going on.
Yeah. So sound must be and I read in the comments underneath this that someone was talking about how one of the channels of sound was slightly out of time. And so I think that sound. Now, again, I don't know if that got tweaked out or not. I didn't notice that there was I didn't think I noticed that. I just noticed the sound was different, and I confirmed that pretty quickly, because when I played this on the Amiga first, and I thought, man, that sound is gonna make me go crazy. It's so manic, but the arcade, it doesn't sound like that. And you're right, it does have a different sort of bassy feel to it. So maybe, I don't know if they used samples or how they did the sound, but again, we don't know. I was pondering something the other day. I was going to run this past you. I played this game a lot this week, and I had not much success, which that's not anything to do with JTD's version. It's just that this game is hard. It's a
It's a hard
it's
game.
double hard game.
Yeah.
And with music aside, and I also should mention, occasionally I would get killed, and remnants of my ship would remain on the screen. That happened a lot. Occasionally, I'd see a weird flash on the screen as well. So there's a few little hiccups here and there, and sometimes the sound would freeze, and that's something else I noticed. Like it would until you finish, something else
Yeah.
happened. So
That happened to
there
me
was
too.
there were a
Mhm.
few issues like that, but nothing. There's no deal breakers. But anyway, getting back to what I was saying, when this game came out, the only game really they had a game like Space Invader, its derivatives to base the game on. And so when you're making a game like this, and they made the decision to have one shot on the screen at a time, okay, which is that, and a game like this, that's what the real main difference is between this and Galaga or Galaga is that without having rapid fire, you're always hunting your shots, and it's shoot and wait, and in the time in between shots, all you could really do is try to maneuver yourself into a position where you're not going to get shot or you're less likely to get shot. And so a lot of people, that's a turn off. But what it does to me is this is a game that stands on its own as its own game because that's what makes this game totally different than Galaga in every way. I mean, there are plenty of things you could compare, but the game feel is totally different because when you're limited to that one shot and you've got just the one ship, it makes it so you have to play this in a totally different way than you play Galaga. And so what that does is it makes you approach the game. You have to sit back and think, how am I going to play this? You can't just play it like you do any other shooter. I call it the attack and retreat because you have to be aggressive when you can be, and then you have to run when you can't be aggressive. And it's a weird dichotomy, and that makes this game unique among these sorts of games. It's real strange. A lot of people straight up hate this game. I mean, hate it. But there are some people that are great at it. I read about a guy he ran this thing up to level 20. Like, there's no chance of me ever getting to level 20. But I could barely get to level 4 on this game. And it's real difficult. What do you think about the game aside on the Amiga? Because they both basically play pretty much the same. What did you think about just the game itself? Like, where do you fall on Galaxian?
To me, this is just a step. This is the last step too far back in time for me. You know, everybody has that point
Yeah.
where you sort of hit the wall in terms of what's enjoyable, where you can appreciate it from a historic perspective, but it's not a game you enjoy playing. Because to me, this sort of wait and retreat mechanic that you talked about, which you described so well, was done better in a game in King and Balloon, where King and Balloon you're still limited to that one shot at a time, but you have unlimited men and you're also dealing with a different objective. So you've got other things to think about. I think in terms of the space shooter as a platonic ideal, they just needed one more iteration. If I'm going to play a game like this, it's going to be Galaga 100% of the time because it just feels like I want it to feel. Um, this is a really hard game.
Yeah.
I struggled to get past the second level. It's just I don't know if it's because I have a hard time concentrating. I always tend to make stupid moves because I'm thinking more about planning my shots than I am dodging. It's a game that requires a lot of your concentration. This is not your mindless shooter, which is why I like to play shooters because I like when they're mindless. It's very I think it's a very fair game. I don't think that it's whenever I die, I can be like, well, I know why I died. But it's one that requires a lot of thought and a lot of careful planning, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I think because I was like everyone else, I was like, man, Galaxian, like that, screw that. But again, when me and the Chud played this, Chud's a big
Mhm.
shooter guy,
Yeah.
and he kept telling me, it's like, listen, we got to get some Galaxian, and this game's you're not giving it its due. And it's sort of like one of those things where it just clicked. and then and when I say that, I don't mean I suddenly got better at it, but I got better at the philosophy of this game,
Hmm.
and that's what makes it different. It's a game, and if you think about the progression of Space Invaders, if you think about Space Invaders, someone looked at Space Invaders and said, "What can we do to make this more interesting? What if the invaders come down? What if the ship what if the ship can move quicker and shoot a little faster? What if the bad guys can come down as a formation?" And then that's what they did. And then so Galaxian is the natural progression upward for Space Invaders, and Galaga is the natural progression up from that. That's why I didn't like Galaga 2 or Galapagos, because they just took a good concept and just made it goofy.
Yeah.
That's not progression. That's just being goofy.
Right. Happy Coding brings up a good point in the chat. Not only was this very influential in terms of its software content, but this hardware was used on tons of games going forward for years and years and years afterwards.
It may have been used on King of Balloon. Now think about it.
That's what he said.
Worked on it.
That's what he said. Yeah.
Well, there you go. But this, I mean, if you look at JOTD's releases, in terms of popularity, I'd say this one and this are like maybe Super Bagman, probably near the bottom,
Mm-hmm.
But both those, and listen, I'm no Super Bagman aficionado either, but they're both tough games, and Bagman is too. But they're both games where you have to think differently, and they play like pretty much no other arcade game. This is a game that doesn't, once you really sit in a place for a while, you'll still get killed early on the third screen sometimes, the second screen, because these guys fire in mass, and it's crazy. And when you're playing this for high score, you've got to be adept at picking off those two formations that come down. And so that's another problem when you're trying to knock those things off, because this game is tough to get points. Points are a precious commodity in this, and the big points come from taking out all three of the ships and their little armadas that come down. If you take all three of them out, you get, I think it's like 800 points, something like that. If you just take them out individually, you get far fewer points. And so if you're playing this to score, and when you try to take those things out, it's dangerous because they throw down a crap load of shots and make it tough. So, like I said, it's a tough game, but I like it. I like the sound, with the exception of the errors in the sound on this. I think the sound is otherwise. I mean, the arcade sounds quite good. If you look at these games side to side, Bodes, and compare the two. Of course, the Amiga one's a little bit wider there, but I mean, if you spread them out, I mean, I'd say it's a pretty good match for the most part, wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me ask you, did you perform any better at one or the other of these games? Did you have better luck or more success?
I had better luck with the arcade version. I felt like I could move a little bit faster, and I felt, I don't know, I felt like, I'm sure that the game. I think the game actually does. It seemed to move faster and smoother to an extent that I felt like I had more control over my ship.
I'm going to second that. I did think that, to me, and I don't know why. Maybe it's because of screen real estate.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, I don't know. But I did feel like I was a little more nimble with the arcade version. And I don't know if this scales up depending on what your Amiga is. I mean, it runs on a 500, so I'm guessing it should be able to cope with the speed of the game. It could just be a mental thing. It could just be the screen. I don't know, but I felt the same way as you. At the end of the day, is Galaxian the game you're gonna go back to, or are we done with the Galaxian game?
I'm done. I mean, if they come like, would I play Galaxian with anybody that asked? Yeah, I don't hate the game, but it's just, in the genre, it's not the game that I would ever voluntarily go to.
Yeah, but in terms of the port we're looking at, or the transcode, it's JOTD is the man. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah,
and this is a totally serviceable version of Galaxian. Again, I don't know if he's going to plan any more updates for it. I couldn't find any special menus or anything. I mean, he did build a pause into the game, but like some of his games, there are some special things you could do, but I didn't know about any of the other elements of it, so I don't think there's anything else stuck in here. Well, it's funny, Bo. This is actually listed on Lemon, and they did give it a score. if you can believe it. Lemon gave this a score of 6.5. Did we get any Discord action on this?
Oh yeah, we did. Let me look that up real quick here. Some of arcade reviews. So we got our first one comes from Pajako. He says, I've played me a lot of Galaxian over the years. I'm still not great at it because I inevitably lose my cool and start smacking the fire button like I'm playing track and field when the action heats up. But I've played enough to know how it feels in the arcade, and the current beta build I've played talks the talk, but doesn't quite walk the walk yet. For me, there is perceptible delay between pressing the fire button and the shot taking off, which throws your game off if you're used to playing a certain way. Thought it might be the input lag on the arcade core in my mister, but it's as it should be. There's a couple minor to-dos to fix in the audio and graphics, but I'm sure JOTD will work the usual witchcraft, and it'll be darn near perfect soon. No scores, this is work in progress, but it definitely gets the thumbs up and some cool sunglasses. BFB Triple I writes, Galaxian's a classic, and although it has been relegated to blueprint status because of Galaga, it remains a game of great wonder and imagination. As of writing, the game is unfinished, but that's okay, it already soars. There are some small issues. Stars do not yet twinkle, sound glitches between samples, odd timing issues to button up. That said, if this game had been released as is in 1986, it would have joined Marble Madness as the killer app of the year. For now, JOTD gets the lowest score I think possible to give to the patron saint of Amiga ports, 9 out of 10. So yeah, I agree totally with BFB Triple I. JOTD is the patron saint of the Amiga port. And the thing is, once you put a game out and it's, let's say that this is 90% of the way there, I can imagine he's got so many other projects he wants to get to. If we don't see another update, I'm not going to fault him that there are some still things that aren't perfect. Because listen, he's bringing us so many other things that I've gotten so much joy from. I just want him to work on what he loves,
Yeah, and obviously he's picked out some of the all-time greats. I mean, his taste is great. Let me ask you, that review mentioned someone's perceived delay on the fire. Did you? Is that something you picked up on?
I didn't, but I'm not a Galaxian, savant. So it's possible that there's a delay that I just didn't realize.
I'm thinking about that because I don't remember thinking that. I thought it was more of a delay of movement, like just overall a bit of slowness.
Yeah.
But because Galaxian, in the arcade game, the firing is so bizarre. It's just the firing is so slow. That it maybe, I don't know. I'm about to go back and check that out. I don't remember thinking that, but it's possible. But just to take it to the house, I hope people haven't written off Galaxian just as the precursor to Galaga. There's fun to be had here. This is a sharpshooter's game. This is a planner's game. And this is a game where for people that like to put themselves in positions to win as opposed to just blowing stuff away. I think if you look at it with a new set of eyes, this one can be a fun time. And the Amiga version, I think, even in beta, is absolutely good enough for you to give a whirl.
Hello, I'm British Jones, and I am here to talk to you about RetroRewind.com.
Mr. Jones, it's .ca.
Oh, for fuck's sake, you put .com right here on the bloody cue cards. Do you like to tinker? Get the old tip wet with solder? Maybe just sketch or doodle. Retro Rewind has an expert team ready to fix all of your creative mistakes. Frank and his team just love how you've learned to fix surface mount components by burning a hole in your A4000 board. So if you've got a priceless treasure you've hacked to pieces because you thought you were Adrian, get it fixed right at RetroRewind.com. It's .ca.
Did you just flip me off?
Bo,
all right, Aaron.
That was a fun time. What we got coming up, you think?
Let's find out.
Oh, look at that boater.
Now
It's
this
Moon
one,
Patrol.
Aaron, this is one of the all-time greats. You just talked about this on the most successful ARG episode of 2024, games you can complete on 1 credit. So I can't wait to get your take on this.
I used to own a Moon Patrol back in the day. I never could play it, though, because the monitor didn't work. But I did own one for a time. So with that kind of expertise, that's what I'll lend the conversation on the next Amiga Summer of Arcade event.
That's right. So we thank you for, as always, for listening. We will see you next week, and until then, adios.
Adios.
Amigos is made possible by contributions from listeners like you. Patreon supporters help choose the games we play, receive exclusive magnets, and get access to the Amigos Retro Gaming Discord server. Visit patreon.com/Amigos Podcast if you'd like to support the show and join our community.